Poverty in Africa is a complex and multifaceted issue, resulting from a combination of historical, political, economic, and social factors. While it is simplistic to attribute poverty solely to the actions of major powers or currency control, it is true that these elements play a role in the global economic dynamics that affect the African continent. The colonial history of Africa has had a significant impact on its current economic situation. During the colonial period, the continent's natural resources were exploited for the benefit of colonial powers, resulting in land expropriation and the extraction of African natural resources without substantial benefits reaching local populations. After independence, many African countries struggled to recover from these colonial legacies and faced challenges in building sustainable economies. Major powers exert economic influence in Africa through investments, trade agreements, and foreign aid. However, this influence does not always translate into equitable benefits for African countries. Some of the ways in which major powers can exert economic control include debt. Many African countries carry a significant burden of external debt, often contracted with international financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund (IMF), the World Bank, and other bilateral lenders. These loans were intended to finance infrastructure projects, economic development, and poverty reduction programs. However, the inability to repay these debts or service the debt consumes a considerable portion of the country's available resources, reducing funds for investment in essential areas such as health, education, and basic infrastructure. The debt burden can lead to a vicious cycle in which African countries are forced to take on more loans to pay off their existing debts, resulting in increased debt and greater financial dependence. Furthermore, the conditions associated with these loans, such as structural adjustment policies imposed by the IMF and the World Bank, often require austerity measures that can harm public services and social well-being. Currency. Dependency on foreign currencies such as the US dollar or the euro is common in many African countries. This is due to investor preferences and the use of these currencies in international transactions. However, this dependency can have negative implications for African countries. Fluctuations in exchange rates can significantly affect the exports and international trade of African countries. When the local currency depreciates against foreign currencies, exports become more expensive, which can negatively impact the competitiveness of African products in international markets. Additionally, African countries that import many goods and services face the challenge of higher prices when their currency depreciates. Dependency on foreign currencies also limits the ability of African countries to control their own monetary policies. African central banks have less influence over the exchange rate and money supply as they are tied to the monetary policies of major powers. This can hinder the implementation of measures to stimulate economic growth and control inflation, as their options are limited by the conditions imposed by foreign currencies. To address these challenges, some African countries are pursuing measures such as economic diversification, strengthening of local industries, promoting regional trade, and seeking equitable partnerships with other countries and economic blocs. Additionally, the establishment of regional financial institutions, such as the African Import-Export Bank, aims to provide financing and alternative monetary solutions for African countries. These measures aim to increase economic autonomy and reduce dependence on foreign currencies. Exploitation of natural resources. Africa is blessed with a variety of valuable natural resources such as oil, gas, minerals, fertile lands, and others. These resources attract the interest of multinational companies seeking to exploit them for their own benefit and the benefit of their home countries. However, the exploitation of these natural resources can have negative consequences for local populations and sustainable development. In many cases, natural resource exploitation contracts in Africa are unfavorable to African countries. Multinational companies often negotiate terms that give them significant advantages, while host countries receive a smaller share of the benefits. This can result from asymmetric negotiations, the lack of bargaining power of African countries, or corruption. The extraction of wealth without proper distribution of benefits can lead to economic and social inequalities, exacerbating existing poverty and disparities. Local communities often face forced displacement, loss of traditional livelihoods, and environmental damage resulting from extraction activities. To address these challenges, some African countries are adopting more assertive approaches in managing their natural resources. This includes renegotiating existing contracts to secure more favorable terms, demanding greater transfer of technology and local knowledge, as well as promoting partnerships with companies that demonstrate a genuine commitment to sustainable development and social responsibility. Unequal trade agreements. International trade agreements are not always equitable for African countries. In many cases, these agreements favor major powers and impose disadvantageous conditions on African countries. This can hinder the development of local industries and limit sustainable economic growth. Many trade agreements require African countries to reduce or eliminate tariffs on imports, opening their markets to foreign products. This can harm local industries, which struggle to compete with cheaper imports. Additionally, international trade agreements do not always take into account the specific needs and interests of African countries, which can limit their ability to develop strategic sectors and diversify their economies. A more equitable approach in trade agreements is necessary to promote sustainable economic development in Africa. This includes ensuring that African countries have a voice and bargaining power in trade negotiations, establishing terms that allow for the growth of local industries, protecting sensitive sectors, and promoting fair trade.